Imagine sitting in a luxurious restaurant, about to enjoy your meal, when a ragged little girl bursts in, terrified, and warns you not to eat the food in front of you. What happens next will shock you, change everything you thought you knew about kindness, and remind you that sometimes, the smallest voices can save the biggest lives. Stay tuned to hear the incredible story of how one child's courage saved a billionaire's life, and so much more. The sun blazed brightly over the city, its rays bathing Ravenstone Avenue in a golden hue. This avenue, renowned for its luxurious eateries, attracted only the wealthiest and most influential individuals, who came to enjoy gourmet meals and exclusive experiences. Expensive cars rolled quietly along the cobblestone streets, while waiters in crisp white uniforms moved seamlessly between tables, delivering food and drinks. The air was filled with the delightful scents of basil and freshly baked bread. Amidst the elegance and calm of the street sat Alastair Munro, a billionaire whose reputation had spread far and wide in the business world. His name symbolized success, precision, and a belief that nothing could ever surprise him again. But that belief was shattered when a small, ragged girl appeared out of nowhere, running toward him with terror in her eyes. Her face was smeared with dirt, and her disheveled hair suggested she had spent countless nights on the unforgiving streets. With trembling hands, she reached toward Alastair's plate and screamed, "Don't eat that!" The moment was surreal. No one in the restaurant moved, their forks frozen midair, taken aback by the sight of a child in such a state of distress. Alastair stared at her with irritation, unsure of whether she was simply begging, confused, or possibly trying to cause trouble. The girl's clothes were torn and patched with worn burlap, and her feet were bare, scraped from walking through the rough streets. Despite her fragile appearance, there was something in her eyes, a raw, pleading fear, that made even Alastair pause for a moment. She appeared no older than 9 years old. But there was something about her, a desperation, an urgency, that made Alastair hesitate. He wasn't used to being disturbed, especially not by the uninvited chaos of a child. Her name, as he would later find out, was Talia, but she had not spoken it yet. For the last 3 weeks, Talia had been surviving in a way no child should ever have to. She had rummaged through trash bins for scraps of food, dodged aggressive vendors who saw her as an inconvenience, and hidden from men who roamed the darkened streets at night, preying on the vulnerable. She had no family left. Her mother had vanished 2 nights ago, leaving Talia alone with only a small cloth bag filled with breadcrumbs. It was a small, cruel comfort, meant only to sustain her long enough to find help before it was too late. Minutes before she had bolted toward Alastair's table, she had been searching the alley behind the restaurant, desperately looking for anything to eat. That's when she saw something strange. A man slipped out of the kitchen's back door. He was nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. In his hand, he carried a small vial. Without a second thought, he poured the contents into the dish prepared for the billionaire, glancing around one last time before disappearing into the busy streets. Talia had seen the man clearly, a tall, thin figure with a scar on his neck, and hands that trembled. He was not there to prepare food, he was there to cause harm. She didn't know who the wealthy man was, nor did she understand the powder he had put in the food, but her instincts told her it was dangerous. She had seen enough suffering to recognize it. So, she ran. She gathered all her strength and sprinted toward Alastair, dodging waiters and yelling the only words she could think of. "Don't eat that!" Standing before him, Talia was out of breath, her small body shaking as she desperately tried to warn him. Alastair frowned, doubting her intentions. Was she simply trying to steal food? Was she confused? Or worse, was she playing some sick prank? The diners around them began to murmur, unsettled by the unexpected interruption. A security guard, alerted by the disturbance, quickly approached the table, his hand reaching out to remove the child. But just as he was about to grab her, Alastair noticed something strange. Talia wasn't reaching for the food. She wasn't trying to steal or beg. No, she was pulling him away from it. There was no greed in her eyes, no hunger-driven desire. Just sheer, unrelenting fear. Alastair paused, his skepticism faltering for a moment. Could this child actually be telling the truth? The hesitation was enough. The head waiter, having recovered from the shock, took a step forward and lifted the bowl in front of him. With exaggerated confidence, he leaned in and sniffed the food. But within seconds, his face turned pale, and his expression shifted to something close to panic. His eyes welled with tears, and his hands began to shake uncontrollably. He whispered urgently to a nearby server, who sprinted back into the kitchen. The restaurant manager appeared soon after, his face drained of color, drenched in sweat. Within moments, the chef himself came running out, shouting for the staff to stand back. The plate was swiftly taken away, as if it were a ticking time bomb. Alistair's heart began to race. He could hear the pounding of his pulse in his ears, drowning out the murmurs of disbelief from the other diners. The chef, visibly shaken, returned to the table with trembling hands, explaining that the dish had been tampered with. The powder added to the food was toxic, deadly in large doses. The chef had no idea who was behind it, but he knew it was meant to harm the billionaire. Alistair was stunned. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. He had dealt with business threats before, covert sabotage, corporate espionage, and more. But this felt different. This wasn't just a business rivalry. This was something personal, a cold danger veiled under the guise of a simple meal. A meal that, without Talia's warning, he would have consumed. His gaze shifted back to the little girl. Talia stood there, still shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Alistair saw more than just a child now. He saw someone who had risked her own life for his. There were no signs of deceit, no signs of a lie. Only raw, unfiltered fear. Talia had saved his life, and he was beginning to realize the gravity of the situation. His thoughts were interrupted when he saw the faintest trace of hope in her eyes. She had done something unimaginable, something that no one else had. She had stepped forward in a moment of danger, with nothing but her voice and her instincts, to save him. With a calm that surprised him, Alistair turned to the staff, giving instructions for the police to be called. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. Someone had deliberately targeted him, and Talia had unwittingly exposed it. The police arrived soon after, their presence adding a sense of urgency to the moment. The kitchen staff, after a brief investigation, identified the culprit. It was a former employee, someone who had been fired just days before and had a history of violent behavior. The authorities quickly took action, but it was clear that Talia had not only saved Alistair's life, she had exposed a hidden threat that could have endangered many others. As the police began their questioning, Talia remained silent, her small frame trembling under the weight of everything she had endured. The officers spoke to her gently, their voices filled with concern and care. They asked her where she lived, but the question seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. The little girl's eyes were distant, hollow, as if she had long ago forgotten what it felt like to have a home, a place where she was safe. Talia's response, when it finally came, was quiet, so small that it barely reached the ears of the officers. Nowhere. Mama didn't come back. Her words cut through the atmosphere like a sharp knife. Alistair's chest tightened at the sound of her voice, filled with such hopelessness, such quiet despair. He had built his fortune by conquering industries, negotiating ruthless deals, and playing a game that was cold, calculating. But in that moment, standing before this little girl who had so little yet had given so much, he felt something stir within him, a deep, undeniable ache. He had spent years surrounded by the richest people in the world, accumulating wealth, power, and influence. But he had never once experienced a fraction of what Talia had. The way she stood there, so small, so brave, with nothing but the remnants of her dignity left to cling to, had moved him in a way he could not explain. The other diners, who had once eyed her with disdain, were now whispering among themselves in awe. Their initial judgment had turned into admiration. The billionaire, whose world had always been defined by exclusivity and precision, was now standing alongside a little girl who had just shown him the meaning of courage. Alistair knew what he had to do. Without a second thought, he stood up from his seat, removed his expensive coat, and draped it around her shoulders. The garment hung loosely, swallowing her tiny frame, but it was warm, something Talia hadn't felt in days. The warmth from the coat seemed to comfort her, if only for a moment. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise, as if she couldn't quite comprehend what was happening. And in that moment, Alistair made a promise to himself, a promise that he would ensure she never faced such a cruel world alone again. He led her across the street to a small cafe, a stark contrast to the opulence of Ravenstone Avenue. There, he ordered food, real food, hot and filling. Talia's eyes lit up as she looked at the steaming dishes before her, but she hesitated. She wasn't used to kindness. Wasn't used to being cared for. But Alistair encouraged her to eat, his voice calm and reassuring. As Talia ate, Alistair listened. He listened to her tell the story of her life, of the alleyway she had slept in, the cold nights without shelter, the cruel vendors who had chased her away. She spoke of her mother, who had vanished without a trace, leaving Talia to fend for herself in a world that seemed intent on breaking her. Her words were steady, but her voice cracked every now and then. She didn't cry, though. Tears had no place in her life anymore. Life had shown her that crying didn't change anything, it didn't bring her mother back, didn't fix the world that had left her behind. But Alistair, who had spent his life running from emotions, running from vulnerability, found himself struggling to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. The little girl sitting before him had endured more in a few weeks than he had in his entire life. And yet, she still had a spark, a fire that refused to be extinguished. As Talia finished the food, her small hands still trembling slightly, Alistair studied her with a mix of disbelief and admiration. He had seen countless people come and go in his world, all of them shaped by the relentless pursuit of wealth, power, and success. But Talia, she was different. She hadn't been shaped by those things. She had been shaped by survival. It was a quality that Alistair had long forgotten in his own life, buried beneath the weight of business deals and corporate strategies. The instinct to protect, the raw desire to make sure that no one was left behind, it had been lost in his world of cold calculations and ruthless ambition. But now, standing in front of him, was a girl who still carried that instinct, even after everything she had been through. Her story was one of unimaginable hardship. Yet, she still had hope. She still had the courage to step into a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty and risk her life for a stranger. A billionaire, no less. Alistair found himself drawn to that courage, that purity of spirit. It wasn't long before the detectives, who had been notified by the police at the restaurant, began their search. Alistair, though shaken by the events of the afternoon, was resolute. He wasn't going to let Talia face the world alone anymore. He wasn't going to allow her to fall back into the shadows of the streets, abandoned once again by the very society that had failed her. With his resources at hand, Alistair used every connection, every advantage to ensure that Talia's mother would be found. He had already made promises to her, promises that he would keep. As the search unfolded throughout the afternoon, Alistair stayed by Talia's side, offering her the comfort of his presence, assuring her that help was on the way. Talia, who had grown so accustomed to rejection and betrayal, had trouble trusting anyone, even Alistair. But as the hours passed, something shifted within her. She began to believe, just a little bit, that there were still people out there who cared. People who wouldn't leave her behind. The detectives worked tirelessly, their efforts only increasing as the day wore on. Finally, just as the last rays of sunlight began to dip below the horizon, they found Talia's mother. She was alive but severely injured, trapped inside a collapsed storage room in an old building. She had been unable to escape and had spent the last 2 days knocking on the metal door, hoping for someone to hear her cries. When the police arrived and rescued her, she was weak, but her face lit up with relief when she saw her daughter. Talia, who had been waiting in the cafe with Alistair, was led to the scene. As she saw her mother, tears began to well in her eyes, tears she had held back for so long. She ran into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably for the first time in weeks. Her mother held her tightly, whispering words of comfort, promising her that she would never let go again. In that moment, the world seemed to shift. It was as if everything had finally come full circle. Talia had endured the worst of what life had to offer, but she had never lost her love for her mother. And now, after all the pain, after all the suffering, she had her mother back. Alistair stood a few steps away, watching the reunion unfold. His heart was heavy, but it was also full of something he hadn't felt in a long time. A deep, quiet satisfaction. He had made a difference. In a world full of shadows, he had been the light that led Talia to safety, to hope, and to love. It was a humbling experience for a man who had always been driven by the pursuit of success. In that moment, Alastair realized that sometimes, the most meaningful victories were not the ones won in boardrooms or stock markets, but the ones fought for in the quiet corners of life, where compassion and kindness could change everything. As Talia and her mother embraced, Alastair stood there, witnessing a moment of pure love and relief. The once cold and calculated billionaire, who had built his empire on the backs of board meetings and profit margins, found himself quietly humbled. This reunion, the simple yet profound connection between a mother and her child, held more power than any business deal he had ever closed. The evening air had shifted, no longer heavy with the tension of the unknown. It was now filled with the sounds of life returning to normal, a steady rhythm of the world continuing its course. Alastair, though still caught in the gravity of the moment, knew this would be a turning point for him. He had witnessed firsthand the incredible courage of a child who had nothing but a burning desire to protect another human being. And it had saved his life. It was a realization that would stay with him forever. He turned away, knowing his role in this story was finished. But Talia and her mother's journey was just beginning. She had found the strength to speak up, to act when it seemed no one else would. And that one small act had set everything into motion. Talia's warning had been the spark that saved not only Alastair but also herself and countless others from harm. The officers, who had been present at the scene, were equally stunned by Talia's bravery. They too had witnessed the power of one person's courage to change the course of an entire day, perhaps even the course of many lives. The security guard who had been ready to remove her had stepped back, realizing the significance of what was unfolding before him. The diners, once skeptical and judgmental, now saw the truth in her actions. Alastair's heart swelled as he thought of the journey ahead. He had promised Talia that she would not face the world alone again. And he intended to keep that promise. With his vast resources and influence, Alastair would see to it that Talia's future would be bright. No longer would she be abandoned, discarded by a system that had failed her time and time again. As the night drew to a close, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Talia, once a frightened and hungry child, was now surrounded by the love of her mother and the unwavering support of a man who had come to understand the true meaning of kindness. And the world, in its own quiet way, had shifted. Alastair glanced at the horizon, the last light of day fading into the darkening sky. His life, once dominated by ambition and the quest for control, now felt different. The weight of his empire no longer held the same significance. He had learned, in a way he never expected, that even the most powerful could be saved by the smallest, most unexpected voices. Talia's voice had changed everything. Her courage, her willingness to stand up when it mattered most, had made the world a little safer, a little kinder. And in that moment, Alastair Monroe knew that sometimes, the greatest victories were not those won through power, but those won through compassion, trust, and the willingness to help others. As Talia and her mother walked away, hand in hand, Alastair watched them disappear into the night. A part of him felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that he had played a role in restoring hope to a young girl who had nothing. The lesson was clear: no act of kindness, no matter how small, ever goes unnoticed. And sometimes, the greatest power in the world lies in the ability to believe in others when the world has forgotten to believe in them. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Subscribe to Kindness Corner for more real-life stories of courage, kindness, and hope. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories to life. Let us know in the comments what you would have done if you were in Alastair's place. Thank you for watching, and remember, small acts of kindness can change the world.